of this project until I was invited to tour. I want to say the latter part of June, perhaps before the 4th. And I was frankly very surprised because they hadn't come to the commission or any organization that I'm aware of. And my understanding was that you adamantly did not do anything to city property that was not approved by city. And that's when I started asking questions, and here we are. The more I dig into it, the more I'm just astonished as to how we got here with, and apparently after what they've said tonight, there have been other improvements to city property that the city has not been involved with. I'd like to defer to the city attorney to give us a little background as to exactly what's going on, because there are other concerns I have with what's going on.
So this lease agreement is a little bit different than the standard lease agreements and license agreements that we utilize. I did a quick search, and I couldn't find any other agreement where the issuance of a building permit would constitute consent. And there's reasons for that, right? I mean, to put that onus on a permit clerk is unfair and it's unreasonable. So it's a little surprising to see that here. That's not to say that, the parties didn't agree and signed off on it. So that probably needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form this evening, in order to move forward, because it actually sets the parties up for failure. It sets the city up for failure because of what we're dealing with now with, staff that's unable to determine who the actual owner is when, a tenant labels themselves as an owner. So, and it sets the tenant up for failure because they're commencing a project with the mistaken belief that they actually have consent, valid consent from the city, and now they have to stop their project in the middle of it because they have to get the requisite consent. So that line in there, it needs to be removed. It needs to be amended. And I do have proposed language if the commission wants to hear it on ways to make sure that everybody has certainty and clarity, because that's what we want out of this. We want them to succeed. We want this project to be successful and for them to, be making their own revenue so that they're not relying on the city or the CRA. That's what we want. But we don't want to have these situations where so much staff time is being spent on interpreting a contract that should be relatively simple. The public is the owner of these buildings. You five represent the public and the interests of the public. So while this is a long-term lease and they do take on obligations that would make somebody believe that they're the owner, Old School Square is not the owner of this property. And candidly, when you look at the renovations, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, but you should have given the opportunity to review this before they were commenced, because maybe the commission didn't want to change the stairwell, and that's beyond your control now because we're in the midst of construction. So, Francis and staff and I, we had a very good conversation today to discuss the expectations of everybody. And listen, there's communication failures on both sides. I'm not happy with how the city performed in this. I feel that a lot of it is due to the turnover, and we can't really control that. However, as a tenant, they have an obligation. Apparently they know all five of you, right? And in order, just to say, hey, who's the city manager? Can you put me in touch with the city manager? That's not a hard ask, and it's not something difficult to determine. So I think, just based on the conversations today, I think everybody's on the same page as to what the requirements are. That being said, there are portions of this lease that need to be addressed. There's a lot in here that's overbearing, complicated, difficult for staff to interpret and to be able to execute the will and the wishes of the commission, and that needs to be addressed. So this is almost like the tip of the iceberg, because frankly, there's just a lot in here, and there's a lot of requirements that Old School Square has to meet that frankly they're not meeting right now. And whether it's that they didn't have a point person in the city to guide them through the process, or they have their own turnover on their board, which you five don't control that, but there's a lot in here that needs to be addressed. And I know, Commissioner Johnson, you love workshops. This needs to have a workshop, because I think everybody needs to be on the same page as to what the goal is, what the big picture is, and how we're gonna get there. They have a very generous donor who's paying for this. you know, if you were to terminate this lease today or say no to these improvements, I mean, are the taxpayers gonna be responsible for this? Because if you look at it, the building is in no position to be utilized in the state that it is now. And frankly, it has a stop work order. So these are all, you know, these are all conversations that really should have been had a year ago when, in the planning stages. Unfortunately, this is where we are, this is what we're dealing with. But at the end of the day, whatever the commission decides today, I don't think the conversation ends today. I think it has to move forward, and I think bigger conversations need to be had. From my perspective, it starts with this lease.
I'd like to add more to it. Several statements were made. Again, I agree with the attorney, Attorney Jellin. We didn't get an opportunity. Statements were made about a commercial kitchen. I don't think that's in the purview or the mission of what the Old School Square was all about. It's supposed to be entertainment, some other things, but becoming a commercial kitchen wherein people are going to be trained how to do whatever people do is not a part of the mission. It was changed without our understanding and agreement. There are artifacts that no one's even mentioned where they are. I don't know if any of those items that were put in there or when they renovated it in 1990, was the city even watching what was going on then? Was any of the historic items given to the Historic Preservation Society? I think that's the name of it.
Historical Society?
Yes, the Historical Society. A lot of questions, a lot of goings on, and I frankly am a little saddened that the city dropped the ball in making sure that we were supervising and managing our property. And I think somewhere along the way, it gradually got to the point where nobody was watching, things happened, and we don't know what's going on there. We certainly put a lot of energy and concern about not changing the pool reservations, the Pompey Park pool. The CRA couldn't even go in and say, oh, let's make the color and the tiles so that we can get the bathroom done. But this huge renovation, everybody had either blinders or blind eye, and this is what we have now. And as the attorney said, we're in the midst of it.
I think there's a much larger conversation to be had. I believe most likely Ms. Johnson is interested in having that conversation, and maybe in a workshop or even as with our CRA hats on. But today's agenda item is very specific in scope to the renovation. Meeting with staff, and especially with Ms. Jellin, there are obviously a few issues with the lease I want to make sure that we address. No doubt that the internal maintenance and renovations are left to the tenant, except that I don't think when written into the lease that we thought multi-million-dollar renovations were going to be done. I think probably more in line with carpet replacement or painting of walls, et cetera. So I think we need to take a step back. We need to adjust any of the issues that Ms. Jellin has with this lease agreement so that we don't run into issues like this again. And we need to put on our agenda after the A-Guide presentations and after the A-Guide conversation has been had at the CRA level, I think the city commission needs to get together and discuss our expectations of any organization that has the responsibility of running our cultural arts organization at Old School Square's campus. So that's what I would like to see happen. I don't want work to stop. The work can continue. But I think there's a lot bigger conversation that needs to be had in regards to this arrangement or this partnership.
Hi.
Yeah, so I signed the application, and in the application, there's a uniform application in Palm Beach County that Delray's is almost the same as. And there's a space on it to indicate fee simple property owner if not owner, because the owner is the lessee. And I left that blank by mistake. And then there's a place for the owner to sign and the contractor to sign, and I signed as contractor, and I asked Old School Square COO to sign as the owner, because that's just the course of conduct that I've always followed. The county's form says, I think, owner or agent, something like that. And I didn't realize until it was called to my attention, the city's form says property owner. So that's that issue.
You signed as the contractor and the,
Well,
who
Old School
signed as the
Square,
owner?
the COO of Old School Square. That was picked up and caught during permit processing because the permit is issued
So
correctly.
I guess the reason why this commission is struggling is because under our ethics rules, none of you could do something like that. So if a project came before you and you were the business owner, it doesn't, I'm just gonna be candid, it doesn't pass the smell test, right? You know, I understand that a board member can step off the dais but there's just certain things that just have a certain sense of an appearance of impropriety that should be looked at probably a little bit more closely. And I think that's why we're struggling. I think that one thing that you can do is perhaps are minutes taken at your meetings.
Yes.
So maybe if the commission were provided with those minutes to find out exactly what was stated to the board and how the process played out, I think that might give the commission some satisfaction that the board was properly apprised as to what the issues were, that the board properly considered the issues, and that the vote was proper. So I would probably recommend the Old School Square board forwarding those documents. You can forward them to me, and I'm happy to distribute them to the commission so that we can ensure that, that the process and the way that we got to where we are today was transparent and was complete and, was done according to whatever ethics standards you as commissioners would have.
Just touch on one more thing, and I'm just reiterating conversations I've had so people understand what's actually going on. You said there was a couple other compliance issues. Are those the auditing issues?
So in reviewing the lease, and I know Missy can probably speak to it a little bit better than I, but there were some concerns that, I was made aware of the help me?
Guide.
A guide. According to the CRA, I believe it was their agenda memo. It didn't appear that was in compliance. As you know, Old School Square does receive funding from the CRA.
Right.
So as part of this lease, they have to maintain compliance with whatever funding agreements they have with other entities. Otherwise, that could be considered a breach of the lease. I don't know, staff didn't have any documentation of any payment bonds for these construction improvements. And so the lease does require that a bond be issued, obviously naming the city, so that in the event that something happens during this period of construction, that obviously the city's interests are protected.
We can forward that too.
Okay, so, a lot of these things, again, it's that communication,
Yes.
It's just non-existent, and hopefully by having Missy as the liaison, Missy and I have discussed the lease, we're aware, everybody's on the city side is aware of the terms and conditions, and hopefully there will be compliance. There are reporting requirements that I understand you're working on, but they're very late in the form of years, so that we need to,
Yes.
just
Can we
Coming to
discuss how
compliance.
we're going to resolve that, today, so that we can, the people can feel comfortable at the conclusion of this meeting, and maybe we won't actually need a workshop? But
I think we need a workshop, Commissioner. We really do.
We can have Missy or staff just provide a report back in 60 days as to where they are with the requirements. I'm happy to sit with Missy and go through all the terms of the lease that we do not believe are in compliance because we do not have proof of their compliance. And, we can set a deadline of 60 days where we can report back to the commission. And at that point, you can decide, how to move forward.